should be able to play it right from Kansas. But it's a little 7-minute clip on, just to show you how much has changed in 50 years. Nowadays they're doing some clinical trials where they take women who are having bacteria by C-section, and right before they give birth, they're taking some cotton, it's like a mesh, right? Not a swab, but I'm trying to think of what you call that thing. Gauze, thank you. Cotton gauze, and they put it in the woman's vagina right before her C-section. And then they remove it right before they do the C-section, they take the baby out, they make sure the baby's breathing, priorities, and then they take the gauze and they wipe it all over the baby to give the baby mom's microbiome. What happens when you're born, if you're born vaginally? Right? I mean, you're in the vagina, you're just getting, talk about getting coated with everything that's there. Right? It's a throat in your eyes and in your nose and your mouth. Babies, that's how you get your first exposure to microbes. It's whatever's in mom's vagina, man, you get layered in it. And it turns out that it looks like that's actually a really healthy thing. And that when you look at mom's vagina, that the composition of bacteria actually changed right before she's about to give birth to favor organisms like lactobacillus that seem really important in helping baby digest milk after it's born. Fascinating stuff. Now we don't want moms to take lots of antibiotics. We want those bacteria to be healthy, and we think that even having a C-section, if you're going to die because that baby can't get out, you should have a C-section. But maybe we can also give those babies the benefit of what babies who get born vaginally get, which is exposure to this really rich microbiome, full of healthy microbes that help the baby stay healthy and digest food better. There's some evidence that maybe it's prevent obesity later on in life. All sorts of really interesting data. So as I'm talking about all these antibiotics, I'm trying to give you there's pluses and minuses. If you're going to die of an infection, you should absolutely take an antibiotic that works. But you don't want to take them unless you need them. Because the bacteria in you and on you are probably doing you way more good than harm as long as you feel good. Anyway, really interesting. I love how the story changes so much from year to year and decade to decade. You know. Okay. So penicillinase, we talked about this in lab because we were talking about the fact that our plasmid and pigo contain beta-lactamase. So that's just another word for penicillinase. And this is one of the ways the bacteria get antibiotic resistant. Mostly we're going to save this for our next lecture, but because we're talking about the beta-lactam ring, it's worth showing you that if a bacteria has this gene for beta-lactamase or penicillinase, these are the same, these mean the same thing. What happens is that enzyme recognizes this molecule, it breaks open this four-membered ring, and now this has no effect on bacteria making peptidoglycan. So if bacteria can make this enzyme, then when you give someone penicillin, they just rip open, they just destroy the antibiotic and keep growing. Right? So they would be resistant to the antibiotic in the presence of this enzyme. Okay? And I don't know how often this drug is being used now. I know that I've given it to cats in the past. So vets used to use it. But let's say you have a bacteria that might be resistant. One of the ways to actually try to address this is to give the organism penicillin, give the sick animal or person penicillin, but also give them an inhibitor of beta-lactamase. And so it turns out that this clavulanic acid inhibits the enzyme beta-lactamase. It's not effective enough, or we wouldn't have so much trouble with antibiotic resistance. But in some cases, if you give someone penicillin but also add beta-lactamase, it actually makes the penicillins more effective because the clavulanic acid interferes with penicillinase. So this drug is called Augmentin, and it's a mixture of amoxicillin, which is just really one of the penicillins, and clavulanic acid. Okay. Like I said, I don't know if this is used frequently now, but I know that I've given it to multiple cats on multiple occasions for abscesses. Another drug that you've probably heard of that falls into this category is methicillin. Remember MRSA? Methicillin-resistant Staph aureus? Okay, so those are bacteria that are resistant to methicillin. Methicillin is actually a semi-synthetic penicillin. Do you see the beta-lactam ring in here? Okay, so it still uses the same mechanism, but basically the idea here was that if we're going to take that beta-lactam ring that's so important in penicillin, and we're just going to put it in a different molecule, and the penicillinases shouldn't be able to recognize it. So this is scientists and doctors trying to come up with a way to make penicillinases not be able to destroy it. And so methicillin was a new antibiotic that got introduced, and of course now we have methicillin-resistant Staph aureus because we make a new drug and the bacteria evolve a way to survive, and we make another new drug and the bacteria evolve a way to survive. It's kind of like playing catch up, right? They're always playing catch up. Anytime we introduce something new into the environment, some bacteria evolve mechanisms for surviving. This is kind of an interesting graph. So these are, the darker brown it is, the more MRSA infections have been detected. So places where antibiotics get used heavily in the United States, right? In some parts of Europe. In South America, where a lot of times you can get antibiotics over the counter. You can see we have lots of, where antibiotic use is the heaviest, we see lots of resistance. Where antibiotics are largely not available, you see no resistance because they're not being used in the first place. Fascinating stuff. Okay. Of course, people are dying of infections here too, so I'm not trying to, you have to understand that there's a balance. Okay.
What's the gray area?
Gray means that there's no data because there's so few infections, yeah. So Europe has been a lot better than the United States. They've done studies that show the number of times a child and every country in Europe is different. So I don't want to overgeneralize. But there's Africa is huge, and there's many countries in Africa, and they're different too. So we're kind of generalizing. But they've done studies that show that many countries in Europe, the number of times a child is put on antibiotics there is much less than in the United States. So we have a tendency to overprescribe antibiotics in the U.S. And again, I'm giving you examples from my childhood where it was kind of just the standard of care. You could pretty much call the doctor and say, I think my child has a sore throat, and they'll call you and say antibiotics, And there are doctors here that will still do it. Because if you have a person go into your office as a doctor or a nurse practitioner, and they say, gosh, I've got a sinus infection, I need antibiotics, and you say no, you may have a war with them for 20 minutes. Prescribing antibiotics is really quick, right? You can get them out of there really fast. So it's, first of all, you have a lot of people who think that they know what they need, even though they don't. And they're not trained the way you are, right? They haven't passed all these crummy tests and had to go to nursing school and sat in all these lectures. So, but they think that they know what they need, and then so it's faster just to give somebody what they want. And sometimes, if you're trying to build a practice as an independent care provider, maybe they'll go find another doctor if you don't give them what they want, right? So this is tricky. There's business decisions, there's timing decisions. You might work for an HMO that says you've got to see 8 patients this hour, and suddenly this person's spending 20 minutes arguing with you. It takes you got to think of, is it Frances Kelsey? What was her name? Yeah. Or you got to be like her. You got to be stubborn and willing to put in the time, and it's sometimes you don't get supported by the people you work for when you do that. All right. Anyway, more penicillins, and again, I'm not asking you to memorize these as much as I want you to understand the ideas behind them. So ampicillin and amoxicillin are broader spectrum. There are some newer classes, the carboxypenicillins and the ureopenicillin. So we continue. I hope you're kind of seeing the theme here. Once something works, we don't necessarily always work hard to find new things as much as we just try to change the old things a little bit to see if we can extend their use for a little bit longer. As we make newer molecules, oftentimes their toxicity goes up, and very frequently bacteria quickly adapt and become more resistant to them. So these are other versions of beta-lactam rings. These are the carbapenems. These are extremely broad spectrum. If you watch Hunting the Night Bear Bacteria, they talked about the KPC outbreak in NIH. And so this is that Klebsiella pneumoniae resistant carbapenem. And it's an extremely broad spectrum molecule, and so when they couldn't kill this bug, is basically what happened, and a lot of people got sick and some died. Monobactums, cephalosporins also have this beta-lactam ring. So you're going to have to recognize the beta-lactam ring. It's fair game for a test. If I put that on a molecule with the beta-lactam ring on a test, and I say, how does this inhibit bacterial growth? You need to be able to tell me it's a cell wall inhibitor. Because this is a fairly major part of, I won't necessarily ask you what it is. I'm not going to say, is this carbapenem or methicillin? I'm not going to do that to you. But I do want you to recognize the ring and understand that the mechanism by which it works is interfering with cell wall synthesis. Okay. few other cell wall inhibitors that work differently. Vancomycin is a narrow spectrum used against gram-positive. Usually it's used as a last resort against MRSA. Vancomycin resistance is becoming a bigger and bigger problem. But this does not have a beta-lactam ring. It looks different. It's a very large molecule. Bacitracin inhibits cell walls at an early stage. Also most effective against gram-positive, just used topically. And there are some new polypeptide antibiotics that people are using that seem to also interfere with cell walls. All right, so mechanism number one. If you prevent bacteria from making a cell wall, you can usually cure the disease, cure the infection. And actually, I stopped. I said too soon. The last cell wall one I want to mention is the antimycobacterium antibiotic. Mycobacterium tuberculosis is still a massive problem all over the globe. It's becoming a bigger and bigger problem here again. It was a big problem in the early 20th century, up through the early 20th century. Sanitation, people not living in slums, antibiotics, all of those things contributed to the suppression, essentially, of tuberculosis. But it has become antibiotic resistant, and it is very hard to kill. And so there are some antibiotics that are specific for mycobacterium. So I mentioned isoniazid once already. It interferes with the synthesis of those glycolic acids, those really greasy lipids that we said. That's why we had to heat it in the beaker and steam it to try to get the dye in, because these glycolic acids are greasy and they prevented the dye from getting into the cell. Ethambutol is another one that can be used in combination with isoniazid to try to treat TB. And we're going to actually spend half a lecture to 3/4 of a lecture just talking about TB right at the end of the semester, because it's actually one of the modern plagues that you should be familiar with. And treatment is actually complex and interesting, but complex. Okay, so the second type of antibiotic mechanism that I want you to know about is protein synthesis inhibitors. And I mentioned earlier that you have 80 S ribosomes, but prokaryotic cells have 70 S ribosomes. And so basically all of these protein synthesis inhibitors target the differences between your ribosomes and the eukaryotic and prokaryotic ribosomes. Remember that your mitochondria, though, are like bacteria, right? We said that was one of the ways that it was determined that mitochondria really came from prokaryotic ancestors. But it seems that most of these drugs don't do damage to the mitochondria. They don't get all the way into the cells and then into the mitochondria to harm them. Okay, so here's hopefully you remember this from this last exam. Here's our ribosome, right? Here's our messenger RNA and our 30S ribosome and then the 50S ribosome. And here's 3 different protein synthesis inhibitors that you've probably not only heard about but likely have taken in your lifetime. Chloramphenicol binds to the 50S ribosome and prevents the peptide bond from being formed. Tetracyclines interfere with tRNA attachment to mRNA ribosome complex. And streptomycin actually changes the shape of the 30S ribosome, and it causes the mRNA to be read incorrectly. So these all do different things, but they all do have the same general mechanism, which is they inhibit protein synthesis. So you give a bacteria this, it shouldn't hurt your ribosomes, but it messes with the bacteria's ability to synthesize protein. And again, these don't usually kill the bacteria. They just can't make protein and continue to divide, and if you remove the drug, then they would grow again. However, if you suppress growth for long enough, that gives your immune system a chance to really finish off the bacteria. So we rely on your immune system to do that, to do the killing. And this just slows down the infection. This is kind of a cool picture because this is actually what ribosomes look like. I kind of draw them as those 2 little snowmen, but this is a better picture. But this actually just has a few more different flavors of antibiotics that interfere with protein synthesis. So the oxazolidinones interfere with initiation. Let's see here. This one is another one that's interesting. The macrolides actually block the ribosome and prevent the polypeptide from being released and coming out. Kind of fun stuff. All right. So this is just another 50S subunit inhibitor. This is clindamycin It's actually really good for anaerobes. This is used for acne. I don't know if anyone's ever used this, but you tap it on your face. So this worked great for me for about 2 years in college, and then it completely stopped working. Probably because the bacteria became resistant, right? But for about a year, maybe it was just a year, it was a golden year. Anyway, so this is one clindamycin, just topically used. Chloramphenicol is another one. So this inhibits the formation of peptide bonds. You don't use it topically because it can have GI side effects, not necessarily related to its function on the protein synthesis, but just because of the drug itself. You do not need to memorize which protein synthesis inhibitor does which. So I'm not going to ask you that which one is the 50th subunit inhibitor and what binds to the 30th subunit. If you protein synthesis inhibitor as the category is enough. But I did want to kind of illustrate that there are different ways that this can work. All right. 30th subunit inhibitors. I just wanted to mention this one mostly because of tetracycline. So these are teeth of someone who was given tetracycline while their teeth were still developing. So this is important to know about when you are in utero inside mom and then early till you're about 8 years old. Your teeth are mineralizing. So they're either in your jaw, your permanent teeth are still being formed in your jaw, or your baby teeth are being formed. And as they erupt, they've actually already been developing. And if mom takes tetracycline while she's pregnant, or if you take tetracycline as a young child, the tetracycline will actually bind to the enamel, the calcium complex to the calcium phosphate binds. And as the tooth erupts, it has a little bit of a fluorescent color, which then oxidizes with the light and turns this brown color. So we try not to give tetracycline to pregnant women or to children under 8. There's some evidence that long-term tetracycline use as an adult can still change the color of your teeth, even after they've fully formed and erupted. So anyway, it can also cause liver damage in pregnant women. So one of the main points of this is to remind you that tetracycline can cause discoloration, because you should know that. The other is just to know that just because it kills the bacteria doesn't mean it doesn't do other things to you. So sometimes you have to make a tough decision about whether or not the infection is going to really be so serious that you're willing to accept the other side effects. And it's just something that clinicians have to do all the time. They do it with antibiotics, they do it with heart medicines, they do it with psychiatric drugs. If someone is really unstable, sometimes it's worth giving them a drug, but that drug might dull them cognitively or make them not feel well otherwise. So, oftentimes drugs are a real trade-off. All right. The other thing about tetracycline that's interesting is it's often added to animal feed to reduce weight gain. So I will try to touch on this next time when we talk about antibiotic resistance, but that's kind of an interesting story. Lots of you have used Neosporin. Yes. My mom always has a bottle of Neosporin. She always wants me to put Neosporin on stuff. And she was a nurse for many years, and she knows this stuff when we have this conversation, but it's like a knee-jerk instinct. Put Neosporin on it. No, it's not infected. Or even if it is infected, your body will usually fight off a lot of the things on its own. But anyway, Neosporin is a triple antibiotic cream. It's got polymyxin B in it. That's one of them. Triclosan is actually a molecule that's found in, or at least it was found in, lots of hand sanitizers. I believe it's been banned in California now, which I was really excited about because it does absolutely nothing to make your hands cleaner. All it is a marketing ploy so you can say it's got an antibacterial agent in it, but it turns out that this goes into the environment. It's possible that it breaks down into molecules which can be endocrine disruptors. So all you do is create lots of bacteria that are resistant to triclosan when you use that hand sanitizer. Soap and water work just as well. No point in adding it. I used to go to Bed Bath & Beyond, that store in the mall. They have all these really pretty soaps. Now they don't do this anymore because the law changed, but I would go in there and I would want to buy their hand soap that smelled like, peppermint for Christmas. And I'd be like, it's full of triclosan. And I would go complain. And I'd be like, why do you have triclosan in your soap? And the poor little person who's working there is like a high school student. They'd be like, crazy ladies. Nothing to do with the formulation of their soap. But it used to really bother me, so anyway. They don't contain Neosporin. Neosporin doesn't have triclosan. It has polymyxin B and 2 others. I actually don't know what the other 2 are. You could look it up.
I can tell you.
You can go. Here we go. Oh, because your Band-Aids have Neosporin in them?
No, but I stick this in the box. No, I cut myself.
Oh, you cut yourself.
So I'm carrying it around. bacitracin, neomycin, polymyxin B.
Polymyxin B is the reason I have that.
And permoxine.
I don't know about permoxine. The other two are antibiotics. Yeah, permoxine might be for pain relief.
Yeah, that one's the emulsions better.
Yeah. So, is your cut infected?
Not anymore.
Was it? Did you slice it to?
Yeah, I cut it really deep.
Yeah.
So I didn't care if it was infected, just had pain relief in it.
Oh, got it. The antibiotics were superfluous. It was pretty I bought a new knife for cutting bagels. That's what my husband does.
yeah.
This is my bagel knife to cut vegetables and fruit. And then they're always wet. And it was going to be a divorce. We were having. This is the easiest way to prevent a divorce by getting a new knife. And now we have like 4 bagel knives because I want a clean bagel knife for it. Anyway.
Yeah.
He's so difficult to work with. But the first time I used it, I sliced it, took my finger up, so it was really sharp. And anyway, it's really amazing that it healed right back up. It goes back into kind of yourself. All right. It was fascinating, but it was a little painful. I digress. All right, so we're going through the list of, so that was the membrane inhibitor. Nucleic acid synthesis inhibitors are, the ones that are most famous are rifampin, which is rifamycin. And then Cipro is the other one. So it's a fluoroquinolone, I believe, and it's, so this is one of the categories. So these inhibit DNA gyrase. This is really famous because they used it for anthrax. So whenever someone gets powdered spores, they think it's bacterial spores in the mail, they can put them on Cipro to prevent anthrax. So it's Bacillus anthracis produces anthrax spores. So you know how they send, you heard somebody getting anthrax in the mail? So they just isolate the spores and dry them down because it's a spore former. Anyway, that's what that is. But you can treat Bacillus anthracis with ciprofloxacin or Cipro. But it's a DNA inhibitor. So rifamycin and Cipro are the two that are used. Cipro is used all the time. Cipro gets used all for UTIs quite a bit now, urinary tract infections.
IBD on there? Irritable bowel disease?
IBD, where? UTI?
After anthrax.
Oh, IBD, irritable bowel. Yeah, that's probably what that stands for. Maybe if they think it's due to an organism in the bowel that's causing the irritability. Okay, this is sulfanilamide. We've talked about this before. So here's our para-aminobenzoic acid. And remember that this gets turned into folic acid, which then is a precursor to DNA and RNA. And so this is the sulfanilamide is a competitive inhibitor to the production of folic acid from para-aminobenzoic acid. And there's actually trimethoprim and sulfanilamide, so they act in different parts of this process to inhibit this pathway. So we call these inhibitors of metabolism, essentially, because they block these metabolic pathways. So there's our 5 mechanisms of antibiotic resistance. All right, here, let's do a few clicker questions. Which of the 5 mechanisms does this molecule use to kill or prevent growth of bacteria? Last chance to click in. All right, so you guys are hard to fool, right? You guys all saw that beta-lactam ring in there, and so you knew that it was an inhibitor of cell wall synthesis. So don't be scared by the big molecule. All right. This is, I have this here for a reason.
Separas.
What are viruses? Just to remind you, what are viruses? Do they have cell walls?
No.
Do they synthesize their own protein?
No.
No.
Do they have cell membranes?
No.
No.
Do they undergo metabolic pathways?
No.
Do they make their own DNA and RNA?
No.
Are there any of these antibiotics that should hurt a virus?
No.
So people go to the doctor all the time when they have a cold and they want antibiotics, right? But antibiotics won't help you with the cold. All they'll do is kill all the good microbes that are in your body. And so antibiotics are not appropriate for giving people with viral infections. It turns out that lots of ear infections are caused by viruses. Lots of the time when you have bronchitis, that's caused by viruses. So a lot of things that people take antibiotics for or want antibiotics for are actually caused by viruses. And most of the time your body kills off a virus or manages to get the best of a virus in 7 to 10 days. So right about the time you get so sick of it that you go to the doctor and ask for antibiotics, you're kind of at the end anyway. So you take it for a couple days, you think, oh, I'm getting better. But you would have gotten better anyway because the only thing that's going to get rid of a virus is really your immune system. There are a few drugs like Tamiflu that can sometimes lessen the severity of the viral infection if you take it right when you get sick. But antibiotics don't help.
Can you have both, like bacterial and viral?
Yeah, you can. So someone who, for example, who gets the flu is more vulnerable to getting a bacterial pneumonia. So yeah, there are.
Last winter, I was sick for like 2 months.
Yeah.
And until I got prescribed antibiotic, I was not okay.
Right. So there are times when things develop into bacterial infections. There are definitely times when antibiotics will make you better.
And it was a
But it has to
fight
be a bacterial.
to get it prescribed to me.
It was what?
It was a fight with my nurse practitioner. She was like, no, I'm not going to prescribe it to you.
And that's really, she was doing what she should do. Yeah, and it's hard to know. So eventually after 2 months you got it, would you have fought it off anyway? It's hard, we don't necessarily know for sure. It can take a while. A lot of times when I get a cold, I'll cough for 2 months. It drives everybody crazy, but I just have a real, get really irritated easily. So that's, but it's not because it's a bacteria. And I'm trying hard. I'm not sure how successful I am. Trying hard to convince you that you really don't want to take antibiotics unless you really need them, because they do more harm than good if you don't need them. Yeah.
2 questions. One, they had read a few studies about taking zinc on the first onset of a cold. What mechanism is happening there?
Yeah, so no mechanism.
Okay. Just a placebo.
Yeah. So, but I'm happy, so science, there's a blog called Science-Based Medicine where they tease apart studies, and they'll take something like zinc and they'll actually look at all the studies and kind of tell you. And they actually, if a study's not done well, they'll actually tell you that too. So it's not just any study. They don't just say, well, this study said that. They actually look at the study, and if it was a terrible study, they won't even count it. And so I really like, they're experts in looking at clinical trials and studies. But my recollection the last time I looked at it was that yeah, not to bother buying hot lodges with zinc, but it didn't seem to help.
But that's your kidneys or your liver?
What's that?
Antibiotic.
It depends on the antibiotic. So most of them, your liver processes drugs. When you take drugs, your liver usually does the breaking down of the drugs. So usually we think of these drugs as being hard on livers. There are some drugs that are hard on kidneys. So like if you take lithium for bipolar disorder or mood instability, for long periods of time, that can do damage to the kidney. So it kind of depends on the drug. But most of the time when you think about drugs that we take, pharmaceutical drugs, if they're going to have a problem, we look for liver toxicity. And that's, you learn that in pharmacology.
What about Z-Pack? Like,
That's zithromycin. That's a good drug.
what is?
I believe that's a protein synthesis inhibitor, zithromycin.
It wasn't in the book.
Yeah, I believe those are good because you can take them like for 2 or 3 days. Yeah, there's another drug called Rocephin that you just inject it twice. It's not always a 7 to 10 day trial. Actually, Science-Based Medicine had an article the last 2 or 3 months where they were talking about, we talked about finishing the whole thing of antibiotics, and I'm going to tell you that that's still considered standard practice, but there's some studies that are showing that maybe we don't need to be doing that unless antibiotics is better, and that actually finishing the whole 10-day course is actually more contributing to antibiotic resistance instead of preventing it. So it's interesting. And again, one of the things that I had said before, and I'll say it again, what I'm telling you now is what I know to be the most current science that's out there. But the fact is that 10 years from now, there are things that I'm telling you now that they're going to change. And that's why you have to say, and that's one of the fun things about being in healthcare and being in medicine and being in science. That things are going to change in 10 years. You're going to be able to come back to me and say, gosh, we've learned all these new things. And it'll be really cool because I'll be teaching my class differently then too. But anyway, that's just the nature of the business that you guys have chosen to be in. We're going to know more in 10 years than we know now.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
What causes, what is it that people are allergic to penicillin? Because I'm allergic to penicillin.
Yeah, I'm allergic to it too.
So I always get prescribed Z-Pack, which is why
Which is why you know about it. So what happens, and we're going to talk about this after the next exam, so right after it's the first topic. What happens is, as you get exposed to foreign molecules, your body can accidentally decide that they're dangerous and develop an immune response against them. And usually it's an exposure thing. So I took antibiotics for years growing up, but first time I had allergic reaction I was in my early 40s. Now I can't take it at all. It's just the more you take it, the more, sometimes the small molecules like penicillin will bind to proteins in your body, and then your immune system will recognize that and then develop antibodies against it. And so you may take it 20 times with no problem, and then the one time your immune system decided it recognized it, then the allergies would be discovered. So if you want to avoid getting allergies to antibiotics, try not to take them frequently. And I'm actually allergic to sulfa drugs too, so there's 2 that I can't take if I have a life-threatening illness, and that takes out a lot of antibiotics. So you know, that's another reason not to take them unless you really need them. Lots of good reasons. Okay, so next time we're going to talk about antibiotic resistance, but let's do a disease of the day for the rest of today. Did I talk about Helicobacter already? I did. Okay, well, I was thinking that I had. Sorry. All right, so we'll talk about C. diff. All right, I'm thinking, do I want to do this? I'm trying to decide if I want to show this little video or not. How long is it? 6 minutes.
This is an overview of infection with the Clostridium difficile bacterium, commonly referred to as C. difficile or simply C. diff. The human digestive tract is home to an estimated 500 to 1,000 different species of microorganisms, most of which are harmless or even helpful and live together in harmony. But if something upsets the balance of these bacteria, such as treatment with antibiotics or cancer chemotherapy, certain harmful organisms can multiply out of control and cause illness. Clostridium difficile infection, or CDI for short, is an example of this. CDI is a bacterial infection that causes diarrhea, which can sometimes be debilitating, and other intestinal symptoms by inflaming the colon, causing something known as colitis. When the gut's beneficial bowel bacteria are disrupted, the C. diff bacterium can multiply, producing toxins that damage the bowel and cause intestinal symptoms. In very severe cases, C. diff infection can even result in death. A person might harbor the C. diff bacteria in their gut but do not become sick because the beneficial bacteria in their intestines keep it in check. However, there are a few risk factors that, when present, might, to varying degrees, increase the chance of contracting C. diff infection. These include being older than 65 years of age, taking antibiotics, especially over a prolonged period of time, having a severe underlying illness, being in an immune-compromised state, receiving chemotherapy to treat cancer, taking proton pump inhibitors to reduce stomach acid, having had a previous episode of CDI, having a prolonged hospital or care home stay, because there you have an increased risk of being exposed to the bacterium. A recurrent case of CDI can be defined